Hey, it's Vicky, and today I'm doing one of my favorite videos that I do for the entire year, and that is my favorite books of 2023. This is also the video I like to watch the most at the end of the year. I love watching everybody's favorites because, I mean, it's just fun to read about or hear about all the books that people loved in the year and hopefully get some good book recommendations. So the way I do my favorites is a little different. I know everybody kind of does theirs differently. Some people like to just do like a top 10 or a top 15. Some people like to just talk about all the 5-star reads they had. I like to do mine by genre. So all the books in this video are not necessarily 5-star reads, but they were my favorite in that particular genre. And that's just the way I like to do it. I don't know why, it's just the way I've always done it. So I read 96 books in 2023, and I have, I think, 9 or 10 favorites that I'm gonna talk about in this video. So let's get into it. So it's no surprise that my most read genre in 2023 was horror, right? You guessed horror, right? I want to say of the 96 books I read in 2023, about a third of them were horror books. However, picking my favorite horror book was super easy. It was probably my easiest pick that I made for this whole list. And this book was probably, if I had to pick a favorite for the entire year, like my favorite book of the year, this book would probably be it. Hands down, loved this book. And that book is Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova. I had to look up the author's name because I always forget it, but this is a book that was not on my radar. I picked it up because I happened to see it at my library, and I think I had heard that it was going to be a Literally Dead book club pick, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll give it. And then I read the synopsis and I was like, oh, that actually sounds really good, so I gave it a try. And otherwise, I would have missed out on one of the best books I read, probably the best book I read all year. And I think the reason that this one was my favorite horror was because obviously the horror elements were really good. The book is about a grieving family and the lengths they go, well, I should say the lengths that the mother goes to sort of remember her child. The book opens with this husband and wife, and their son passes away, and the mother, in her grief, cuts out a piece of his lung and puts it in a little jar. And she starts to feed it and sort of nurture it, and it becomes sentient, and it grows and becomes this little monster that they call Monstrilio. And the book is just about how they interact with him and the relationship with him, because he is not a conventional human. Is he even human? He does some questionable things. So the book is a lot about grief, because this whole thing stems from them losing their child. And but it also deals with nature versus nurture. It deals with what makes a monster. There's just so many things. And then, of course, like I said, the horror elements were great because, like I said, Monstrilio does some things that are pretty horrific and made for great horror. But I think as a whole, the book was so much more than that. And it just was so emotional. And I just loved it. I loved the story. I loved the way that the story was broken up into, I think it was 4 or 5 different POVs. I loved every single one of them. It just, such a good book. I actually need to buy it because I want it on my shelves, because I'm definitely going to read it again. It was fantastic. And then my favorite mystery, thriller, suspense, I sort of kind of bunch all those books together. And this one also was pretty easy because it was a 5-star read, which is rare for me to give a mystery or a thriller 5 stars. I don't know why. I think it's because I typically, though I find them very entertaining and sort of fun to kind of figure out, especially if it's like a whodunit sort of thing, usually they're just sort of entertainment for me, and they just don't give me that 5-star feeling. But this book did, and that book is The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. And this was my 3rd time reading a Peter Swanson, and this one definitely, in my opinion, is the best of his that I have read so far. And I think the reason this one was so good was because you meet these 2 characters, and neither one of them are great people, but you can kind of see into why they're the way they are. And basically they meet on a plane, and the one basically is talking to the other person about their spouse and how they're pretty sure their spouse is cheating and their spouse sucks and maybe they should die. And this other person's like, oh, I can do that for you. And it's like, what? And then about halfway through the book, it took a turn that I was not expecting whatsoever. And I absolutely loved it. So it was just a great ride. And again, I feel like for a thriller or a suspense book, whatever you want to call this one, the characters had so much depth. And it was just one of those books that really gets you thinking, and you really start to kind of put yourself in that position, like, what would I do? Because it just deals with a lot of gray area, and I just love that. I just loved it. So I don't know if I want to read the sequel. The sequel just came out, I think, this year. It was called The Kind Worth Saving. I'm not sure if that one is one I want to read, because The Kind Worth Killing was so good that, like, I'm afraid the sequel is just not going to live up to it. So I don't know. Let me know if you've read the sequel. Should I give it a shot or not? But for me, The Kind Worth Killing was top notch. I loved it. Then we're going to move on to my favorite sort of contemporary book. I don't really know what I consider a book to be contemporary. I think it's just, it takes place in the present day and it deals with modern themes. Is kind of how I define it. I don't know if that's correct. Let me know. How do you define contemporary? But for me, my favorite book that dealt with those things, I have to look up the author because I, again, didn't write it down, and I don't have the physical book. I read this one on my Kindle. But this is another one that completely took me by surprise. When I picked it up, I honestly picked it up thinking it was just gonna be okay. And I ended up loving it. And that book is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. Excuse me, Bernardine Evaristo. And this one is 12 sort of separate stories that each story centers around a different woman, and it's just sort of their life, and they live in England, the majority of them, and they're all sort of interconnected. So that was like the first thing I loved about it, was kind of, as you started each chapter, kind of trying to figure out what the connection was to, you know, the previous characters you'd already read about. But the book was just so interesting and really dived into just womanhood and what it is to be a woman in the modern age. It dealt a lot with, you know, various relationships, women and women, and working and sexuality and just everything. And the writing was top notch. I absolutely loved it. And like I said, it totally caught me by surprise. Then we have my favorite, like, literary book. And for me, I define literary as, like, the book was very well written, but was sort of challenging. That's kind of how I decide what literary means to be. Again, I don't know if that's a proper definition. That's the way I'm doing it. But my favorite literary book that I read in 2023 was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This one was, for me, it was not a 5-star. It was a 4.5. And I gave it I think I docked it that half a star because sometimes I got a little lost in the prose. But with that being said, the prose was absolutely gorgeous. It dealt with a young man who is writing a series of letters to his mother, just about growing up, and it was just beautiful. Ocean Vuong typically writes poetry, and you could tell when you read this book. There was a whole section in here, I actually still have it marked, that started right here on page 153. This whole section read like a poem, and it was lovely. This book was hard-hitting, it was emotional, it was, like I said, beautifully written, and also slightly challenging. So if those are all things that you think you would like, I would definitely recommend this. It was my favorite literary book of 2023. Next up are my favorite nonfiction and memoir books of 2023. I always divide these up because I think it's so hard to pick just between all the nonfiction and memoirs that I read, to pick just one. So I pick a memoir and I pick a nonfiction book. That's just the way I do it. Both of these books were 5 stars. So awesome. My favorite nonfiction for this year was Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This one I read towards the end of the year. And again, this one, I think what made it so great was the choice that Bryan Stevenson made to insert himself into the story. Because this is all a book about his life, career-wise, how he sort of got into law and how he started working on in a specific area of the law and started the Equal Justice Initiative, which is a practice that focuses on people that have been wrongly convicted or are on death row, and he is working to get that sentence reversed and to set these people free. And so the work he's doing is incredible, and it's just amazing that he is doing that, but it's also sad that it even has to be done, that our criminal justice system is so messed up that people are constantly being wrongly convicted. In the cases he talks about in here specifically, it was just so obvious that the person did not commit the crime, yet they were convicted. And so it talks a lot about racism, it talks about class, because all of those things come into play. And I liked that he made the choice to also talk about just his own sort of life as a Black man and how that obviously influenced a lot of his work. And how even he himself, being educated, being an attorney, he himself has also faced those sorts of prejudices in his daily life and things like that. So this was really well written. I listened to the audiobook of this, and it was narrated by Bryan Stevenson, and it was just very engaging. I really loved it and highly recommend it. And then my favorite memoir was Finding Me by Viola Davis. I loved this book because I think Viola Davis is a great actress, and she has just a great personality. You can tell she's just very humble. She really loves what she does and is very serious about her craft. But then she's also very funny. And you see that in this book. You see what her life was like growing up, that, you know, she grew up very poor and had a lot of struggles and overcame them and has become an Academy Award winning actress. And so yes, this book is at times difficult. For me especially, there was a section, without getting into spoilers, that hit me hard because of things I was going through in my own personal life at the time, that just hit hard, that maybe made me cry a little. So yeah, Viola Davis is an amazing woman. This is an amazing memoir. It's very inspiring. It's very awesome. So if you like memoirs, you should definitely check it out. Next, we have my favorite graphic novel, which is one that I don't actually own, but I feel like I should purchase it. I actually read this book on a whim, which seems to be the case for some of my favorites this year. Like, they were not on my radar. I didn't really think anything of them, and then they ended up blowing my mind. This was one of them. I read this because my daughter brought it home from the library one day, and I just kind of saw it on her nightstand, and I picked it up, and then I didn't put it back down until I finished it. And it was a middle grade graphic novel that I have never related to more in my whole life, and it was called Guts by, is it Raina Telgemeier? If that's wrong, I'll put it down here. This is a graphic memoir about Raina and how when she was a kid, she had a lot of anxiety, and it manifested in her body as having stomach issues. So she would get stomach aches and feel sick, and then she was also afraid of getting sick. The thought of throwing up or whatever would send her into a spiral, and it was just this vicious cycle. And I related to that so much because I myself have emetophobia pretty badly. And also with me, stress tends to manifest into my belly, and especially when I was a kid. But as a kid, I didn't understand that was why I was having these issues, that it was really anxiety and stress. And so for me, I just thought, as a grown woman, I was like, wow, this book is so relatable. I love this. This is me. Like, this is totally me. And even though it's geared towards middle grade readers, I think a lot of kids who are in a similar situation can relate to that book. And then added to it that it's in graphic novel format, so that also I think makes it accessible to, I think, a lot of kids that maybe don't really like reading very much, but they'll pick up a graphic novel. And it tackles a topic that I think a lot of kids can relate to. And even if they don't experience those things themselves, they can understand why maybe some of their peers do. And so all in all, I thought it was fantastic. And it's one I would definitely read again. My daughter also really enjoyed it. She likes all of Raina Telgemeier's books. I think her favorite one, though, is Smile, which I haven't read. So overall, I thought it was fantastic, and I loved it. Next is my favorite sci-fi fantasy book. I kind of combined the two genres. And this one, again, is another one that is one that I enjoyed a lot more than I thought I was going to. And that is Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shauna McGuire. This is the second book in the Wayward Children series. I read the first one, and the first one was okay. I gave it 3 stars, but I was like, I'm gonna go ahead and read the next book, because the next book, this book, dealt with 2 characters from the first book that were my favorite. They were the most interesting to me, so when I saw that the second book was about them, I wanted to pick it up. And I felt like this book was so much better than the first one. It was not a 5-star read for me, but it was, I think it was a 4 or a 4.5. And I think for me, this one was just a standout because A, the writing I felt like was just so great. And it tackled so many interesting themes and topics dealing with parenting. Like, coming at this book as a parent, I feel like I learned a lot about what not to do, because it deals with, yeah, these twin girls that their parents were not the best. And their situation, I feel like, is a situation that a lot of kids deal with, where their parents are trying to live vicariously through them, or trying to push their hobbies, loves, agendas onto their kids, and not letting them be themselves and have their own interests and their own things that they like to do and their own passions. And so for me, it was the themes especially that really grabbed me in this, and I'm definitely going to continue the series. And we'll see how the third book goes. I don't know. This one might be hard to top. And then my last favorite for 2023 is my favorite historical fiction book, and that is, hands down, Washington Black by S.E. Edogayan. This one takes place in the 1800s, and it kind of bounces all over the map, which was one of the things I loved about it. So it's about a young boy named Washington Black who goes by Wash, and he, at the beginning of the book, is a slave on a plantation in Barbados, and his owner's brother is like an explorer slash scientist. He's into like all these sciencey things and likes to travel the world to do things to pursue his interests, and he decides to take Wash with him as sort of a companion slash like assistant. And because of the time period, you know, it's obviously dealing with slavery and issues of racism, because obviously his the owner and the owner's brother are white men. So those themes were really prevalent, very interesting. This book had such a great sense of adventure, which I wasn't expecting. And even some of the science stuff also, I wasn't expecting to enjoy, and I really did. It also had fantastic writing, and Wash was a character that I immediately loved and is one of my favorite characters of the year. So again, if you are at all interested in historical fiction, you should definitely check this one out. Morgan? She's sitting like right here, and she's just scratching, and I'm sure you can hear it. So sorry. All right, so those, Morgan. All right, so those are my favorite reads of 2023. Let me know down below what some of your favorite reads were, or if you had just one favorite book. I commend you for being able to pick just one, first of all, but let me know what that favorite was, or if you just had a couple. I would love to know what you guys were loving in 2023, because you know me, I'm always looking for recommendations. And if you read any of these books, I would love to know what you thought of them and whether they made your favorites list. And I think that is it. So I hope you guys are having a wonderful new year, and I will chat with you soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.